The streets of Kathmandu are filled with a generation in protest. Not against war, not against famine, but against something that feels just as vital, a social media ban. To many, it looks bizarre. Why would a generation risk their lives for a video app, they ask. But this isn't a story about an app. It's a story about power. It's a battle over digital freedom. For Gen Z in Nepal, social media isn't just entertainment, it's a lifeline for news, for business, and for holding a corrupt government accountable. When that lifeline was cut, they saw it not as a regulatory move, but as an attack on their most basic rights. Today, GenShift is cracking open this global case study. We'll show you why this is a fight for the future of democracy itself. Get ready to understand the mind of a generation that's defining what it means to be a citizen in the digital age. Hit that subscribe button now to join us in navigating tomorrow's mind and the technologies shaping our world. 1. The new public square. Why social media is a lifeline. When the Nepal government announced its decision to block most major social media platforms, from Facebook to YouTube and X, it officially cited the company's failure to register in the country as the reason, framing the move as a matter of bureaucratic compliance and national dignity. For many observers, this narrative seemed plausible. The government argued it was cracking down on hate speech, online crime, and misinformation, a rationale often used by governments worldwide to tighten digital controls. However, this explanation completely misses the profound role that digital platforms play in the daily lives of young Nepalis. To understand why a seemingly simple regulatory decision ignited one of the most violent protests the country has seen in decades, one must first recognize that for Gen Z in Nepal, social media is not a luxury. It is a de facto public square, a socioeconomic lifeline, and a survival tool. The sheer scale of digital adoption in Nepal underscores this point. As of early 2024, there were 13.5 million social media users, a figure that represented 43.5% of the country's total population. More importantly, a staggering 87.7% of all internet users in Nepal accessed at least one social media platform. This is not a niche activity, but the dominant mode of communication and commerce for the digitally connected. While older generations might associate political life with physical town halls and community meetings, this new generation's primary space for organization, expression, and information is online. The sudden disappearance of these platforms was perceived as an attempt to tear down this new public square and forcibly return them to a communication paradigm that no longer serves them. The protest also reveals a deeper, more urgent reality. Social media in Nepal is inextricably linked to economic survival. With youth unemployment at 20% and an estimated 2,000 young people leaving the country every day to seek work abroad, many young Nepalis have no choice but to find opportunities in the digital economy. Small businesses, which often lack the capital for traditional advertising, depend entirely on platforms like Instagram and Facebook for marketing and sales, a lifeline that was abruptly severed by the ban. Furthermore, for a country that relies heavily on remittances from its enormous migrant population, social media platforms are a critical, often free, means of communication with family members overseas. The ban didn't just restrict access to a feed, it cut a vital economic and social artery, directly impacting livelihoods and communication with loved ones. The protest slogans, which chanted "Stop corruption, not social media," and "Digital freedom is a human right," were not disparate demands. They were fundamentally linked. The ban was a symptom of the very corruption they were fighting against, a move by an elite afraid of a public that had finally found a platform to expose them. 2. A threat to freedom? The government's perspective. The government of Nepal defended its social media ban by framing it as a necessary measure to ensure social harmony and national security, claiming that the platforms were being used to disseminate fake news and hate speech. They asserted that the company's failure to register and comply with local regulations was a sign of disrespect for Nepal's sovereignty. This narrative attempts to position the government as a responsible guardian, protecting its citizens from the digital chaos. However, to the young people of Nepal, this was not a story of protection. It was a transparent attempt at control. The government's actions and the outrage they provoked can be analyzed through a core principle of human psychology, reactance theory. Developed by psychologist Jack Brem, Reactance theory suggests that when an individual's freedom is threatened or reduced, they experience a powerful motivational state to restore that freedom. The stronger the perceived threat and the more important the threatened freedom, the greater the desire to resist and reclaim it. The government's ban on social media was a textbook example of this principle in action. The young people of Nepal had come to perceive their freedom of expression and access to information as a non-negotiable part of their daily lives. When the government attempted to take that away, citing bureaucratic regulations, it was not seen as a neutral or benign act. It was perceived as a direct attack on their right to communicate, organize, and dissent, triggering a potent surge of anger and frustration. This psychological reaction was massively amplified by a viral online movement that had been building for weeks before the ban, the Nepo Kid campaign. Utilizing platforms like TikTok, which remained largely operational after complying with the registration directive, young Nepalis created and shared videos exposing the lavish lifestyles of the children of political leaders. They contrasted the private jets and luxury vacations of the elite with the high unemployment and economic stagnation faced by ordinary citizens, openly questioning the source of this wealth. The ban that followed this campaign was not seen as a coincidence. It was viewed as a targeted retaliation, a political attempt to silence a public discourse that was hitting too close to home. The government's claim that the ban was for safety created a severe cognitive dissonance for Gen Z, forcing them to reconcile the official narrative with the reality they saw on their screens. The government's move not only failed to stop the criticism, but gave it an entirely new powerful symbol, the fight for digital freedom. By confirming the young generation's suspicion that their leaders were afraid of their voices, the government inadvertently turned a policy issue into a full-blown crisis of legitimacy. 3. A new kind of citizen, redefining digital democracy. The protests in Kathmandu represent more than a localized outcry. They are a profound symptom of a fundamental generational value shift. The traditional model of political participation, often associated with older generations, primarily involves institutional, offline activities, voting in elections, joining political parties, or attending formal, sanctioned rallies. For this older generation, civil rights are enshrined in constitutional documents and expressed in the physical public sphere. For Gen Z, however, the concept of a citizen and their rights has evolved to be inseparable from their digital existence. They are defining what it means to be a citizen in the 21st century. Increasingly, young people around the world view internet access not as a privilege, but as a basic human right, on par with food, water, and shelter. This perspective is not a product of entitlement, but a logical conclusion drawn from the reality of their lives. In a world where work, education, civic information, and even access to healthcare are mediated by the internet, restricting that access is seen as a direct infringement on their ability to function and participate in society. The Nepal protests demonstrate this reimagined social contract in action, when the state failed to provide offline economic opportunities and then also attempted to restrict their online avenues for expression and livelihood. Gen Z responded by demanding a new contract that honors their digital rights. The new model of civic engagement at play here is a powerful synthesis of online and offline action, often referred to as mixed activism. It is a fluid, adaptive form of protest that leverages the strengths of both spheres. Youth leaders like Sudain Gurung, the president of the NGO Hami Nepal, exemplified this new form of leadership. Even after the main social media platforms were blocked, his organization used the still active TikTok and VPNs to circumvent the censorship and organize physical marches.
Wow.
The students who took to the streets in their school uniforms, carrying books, were not just protesting a ban, they were using physical symbols to broadcast a deeply ideological message about the future of their country. This seamless transition from digital mobilization to physical protest demonstrates that for Gen Z, the line between the virtual and the real is not a boundary, but a bridge. Their rebellion is not against the concept of a state, but is a specific and targeted demand for that state to evolve and recognize their values. As one young protester articulated, they were against the government, not against the army or their nation, emphasizing their selective aim to hold a corrupt power structure accountable. 4. A global case study. Lessons from Kathmandu. The story of Nepal's Gen Z protest is not an isolated event. It is a bellwether, a powerful case study for a trend that is reshaping political landscapes globally. What happened in Kathmandu mirrors recent youth-led uprisings across South Asia and beyond, from Sri Lanka in 2022 to Bangladesh in 2024. In each instance, a specific proximate trigger, economic collapse in Sri Lanka, a student quota dispute in Bangladesh, and a social media ban in Nepal, ignited mass protests that were fundamentally fueled by deeper, long-simmering grievances over corruption, elite capture, and a lack of economic opportunity. These movements share a common catalytic factor: social media. The internet doesn't just enable protests, it functions as a political accelerant, fundamentally changing the speed and scale of dissent. In Nepal, the online Nepo Kid campaign had already primed a generation with a sense of betrayal and injustice. The government's subsequent ban was not a spark in a vacuum, but a match dropped into a barrel of gunpowder. The result was a shockingly swift escalation that saw the prime minister resign within 36 hours of the protests turning violent, a speed of political change that is unprecedented and a direct product of digitally mediated mobilization. The lesson from Kathmandu is clear. In an era where the public square is networked, any attempt by a government to control or shut down that space is no longer a matter of policy, but an act of political self-sabotage. This new dynamic is a product of a widening chasm between the perceptions of the young and the old. While traditional power structures view digital platforms with suspicion and fear, a digitally native generation has built its entire social, economic, and civic life on them. When governments attempt to regulate this space, they are, from the perspective of Gen Z, not just passing a law, but threatening their fundamental rights. The battle for digital freedom is the new frontier of civil rights. The Nepal protests demonstrate that a government that fails to understand this fundamental shift will face powerful resistance. 5. A new generation's stand. What unfolded on the streets of Kathmandu was a moment of profound clarity. This was not a protest about a video app or a fleeting trend. It was a powerful act of digital citizenship. For the young people of Nepal and for their generation globally, the battle for digital freedom is a core part of the fight for a fair and just society. When their government tried to take away their digital voice, they showed the world that a generation that has grown up with social media will fight to defend it as fiercely as previous generations fought for the right to assemble or the freedom of the press. It's easy to dismiss these protests, to judge them from a distance, but we can choose to understand them instead. We can choose to see that this generation is not addicted to an app. They are fighting for their freedom. They are defining a new kind of social contract. The real question is whether we and our institutions are ready to understand them and build a future that honors this new reality. Let us know what you think in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to GenShift to navigate tomorrow's mind and the technologies shaping our world.